I am a Hebrew and I am a Roman. Attempted to annihilate the entire Hebrew race, be slaughtered in the stadium floors. His great grandfather and his grandfather were great storytellers. Paul began to receive more and more impressions of the world around him. And one particular story allowed him to understand his place in the world. It was a fantastic story. His grandfather relished telling it, but would always leave out certain parts of the story to tantalize Paul. And one morning, he said, "Tomorrow, we're going to go 12 miles from one end of the Cydnus River to the other, and I'm going to tell you a story of what happened when I was just about your age. I witnessed the greatest day in all the history of Tarsus. And so long before daybreak and moving very quickly, we covered 12 miles. It was no more than 2 in the afternoon. All the time, his grandfather was filled with tales of the period of time when Julius Caesar had conquered the city of Rome and how he had been killed with knives and how 2 young men rose up to attempt to take over the empire, and that there was a great battle between those 2 men and 2 other men up on the plains of Philippi. He never realized that one day he would stand on those same plains and hear the story of those who were defeated, whose name was Brutus and Cassius. Nor had he come to understand that the other 2 men who split the empire into 2 pieces, to the east and to the west, would one day surely meet in one final battle out of which there would be only one survivor. All of these were stories his father told him, his grandfather told him as they moved south to the edge of the Cydnus River. There was something else he noticed, and that was the entire Cydnus River on the eastern side with a small walkway along the banks was a matter of nothing but one heathen temple after another. He paused to look at one of them, for it was larger, richer, more fashionably and more fantastically built than any other. And it was to the Egyptian goddess Aitha. And his grandfather explained to him that this had been only a small temple until a pharaoh came and gave great amounts of money to enlarge the temple where people could come to bow down and worship the leading god of the Egyptians, goddess. And then we came to the end of the Cydnus River. And he looked at Saul and said, "Oh, it was about 60 years ago. And I stood right here and walked all night and through the day, and there were tens of thousands, the entire population of Tarsus on both sides of the riverbanks. The western side was given over to trading, bargaining, barges, uh, small boats, and the eastern side to the building of great temples and places of worship. It was there I sat all day waiting for a speck to peer out of the south, coming up from Egypt. The Pharaoh of Egypt was coming to Tarsus, and we were all there to see it. Paul squinted, almost expecting to see the barge to appear again. All these years later, long after the story had been played out. And then he began to talk. I saw a speck, and every person around us began to rustle, press themselves forward to the mouth of the ship, of the port. Small ships came from all places. Here it came, the speck growing larger and larger until it became a ship, a gigantic barge, the biggest the world had ever known. And as it began to approach the mouth of the Cydnus River and make its way to the heart of the city, great oars came to be thrust out from the side, all of them tipped in silver. And I began, says grandfather, to hear the methodic groans of those who manned the papples. Boom, boom, came the sound deep within the belly of the barge. Each time that the oars moved, they were lifted just for a moment to catch the glow of the sun. And it was just at this time, at the mouth of the river, that the Pharaoh appeared, coming out on the eastern side, knowing that's where most of the people would be. The Pharaoh settled down upon a pile of luxurious pillows and sat there, and then lay down for the entire city of Tarsus to admire. There was one great purple sail. At the top of it were 4 streamers, one yellow or gold, and blue, and red, and white. The Pharaoh, whispered his grandfather, had fingernails and toenails painted green, with great paintings on the Pharaoh's face, with a bedecked golden crown upon its head. The Pharaoh was reputed to be very, very good looking. His grandfather paused and said, she wasn't beautiful. Furthermore, she was overweight, he said dryly. And so he now moved with the barge, running, falling, sometimes slipping down, being pushed, cast aside, nonetheless keeping up with the barge. And now as the barge entered the city, it was discovered that the oars were hollow and great massive amounts of perfume were pouring through the oars into the city until the whole city was wrapped up in an aromatic scent. A city almost alive with the perfumes of Egypt. Suddenly the oars went straight into the air, held there, and the barge glided safely to the end of the river. Out came, from nowhere it seemed, the man who had one half of the Roman Empire to call his own. His name was Mark Antony. He was greeted by the Pharaoh and invited to come inside the Egyptian barge. And I saw the very moment when Mark Antony touched the hand of Cleopatra. All night long, they, we were told, negotiated a treaty. The next morning, and we were told he was in a drunken stupor, he announced that the treaty had not only been reached, but that all the leading citizens of the city, which happened to be Saul's grandfather's father, who was one of the leaders of the city and stood and sat on the seat of the magistrates. All of those who were leading men of the city were now declared to be Roman citizens. And it was at that moment that Saul's grandfather looked at him and put his hand on his head and said, "Son, it was because of that story, which took place some 60, 65 years ago, that made it possible for you to proudly wear the evidence of Roman citizenship around your neck and to say to the world, I am a very rare person. I am a Hebrew and I am a Roman, with all the rights of a man of royalty or leadership born within the limits of the city of Rome." And then he told me what my rights were. Saul thought very little of them. One of them, the only way you can be executed is by the sword. You cannot be tried by anyone except Romans, no matter what your crime. And at any time that you're convicted of any crime, you can appeal to the emperor himself, where your case will be heard and the emperor himself will rule in your favor or against you. Saul was not impressed. He never intended to be in a court of law, and he knew he would never need to be executed, nor even to appeal to Caesar. Now it was almost at this time that Paul reached the age of going to the city of Jerusalem. Now, the tales about that city were too fabulous to believe. A great city chosen by God, ruled over by King David and then by the great King Solomon, a city with the largest and most beautiful temple in the world in it. When the sun rose in the east, it bugled its beams across the face of the walls facing east all trimmed in gold, where not only gave the citizens of the city a breathtaking view of the temple, but on occasion was so bright that men had to cover their eyes in viewing the entrance to the temple. There were two ways to get there. One was to walk. You'd walk past, but not into the hated land of Syria, for Syria and its capital, Antioch. Those were the people who had at one time, over 100 years earlier, had tempted to annihilate the entire Hebrew race. It was the fourth generation of kings of Syria who had declared war on Israel with the announced determination that when he was finished, there'd not be a Jew left alive. Nor did he back down from his word, for there were 40,000 Jews slaughtered in Israel in 1 week. It was at that time Saul's ancestors fled Israel and came to the land of Tarsus in Cilicia. No, you would walk south until you reached Damascus, from Damascus to Capernaum, near Capernaum, across the Jordan River, and on west to the city of Jerusalem, where you would participate in the singing of the Psalms of Ascent, going up to Jerusalem. Whether you came by the east, nor the west, nor the north, or the south, you went up to Jerusalem. Or you might go by sea. The only drawback with going by sea was the terribly crowded conditions on the ships, for ships seemed to come out of nowhere to take the Jewish people in springtime to Jerusalem, not by the thousands, but by the tens of thousands, from all points of the known world, and sometimes from places not known at all. For as far away as Babylon, as far away as a place called Spain 1 and Spain 2, from the mysterious lands of the north where lived the Gauls and the Franks, and even those who lived on the frontier of the north of the empire, those who came from the Germanic tribes, and those who came from Babylon, and as far away, it was said, to some land called India. And the day that Saul went to Jerusalem for the first time, he ported there on the docks of the Cydnus River. The ship was loaded with human cargo, all of them Hebrews. You sat or you slept, whether you sat up or stretched out on the cargo. There was nothing there for you in the way of accommodations, and you provided your own food. The ship stopped at Tyre and Sidon, and also to a small village named Babylon, tiny village made up almost entirely of shipbuilders. The ship came on farther and farther until it began to approach what was called Caesarea by the Sea, a city that had never existed except for being a small village which had been brothels. But now, in what was simply called the Tower, Herod had decided to build a great temple and a city to Augustus Caesar. So the city was named Caesar, the first true Caesar of the empire. Herod was a man who knew how to placate people. The hated Syrians, he built a polished marble road, north and south, east and west, in the city of Antioch. For the Jews, he built a sacred temple, rebuilding that of Solomon's torn down temple. And only 60 miles away, a heathen temple sitting on the banks of the Mediterranean Sea, a city dedicated to the worship of Augustus Caesar and to Apollos. There had been no seaport there, nor was there any hope of one. But Herod the Great had built great wood vats of wood, nothing but woods, about 6 feet deep. Had them floated 700 yards out into the city and sunk. And there they sat. From the edge of the city out to 7,000 yards out. These wooden vats were held down in a restless sea. After they had been solidly procured into the seabed, concrete was pumped into all of these compartments, reaching 77,000 yards out into the sea. The concrete hardened after several years, and suddenly there was a harbor. Ships could come in from the sea on one side and then on another, with the mouth of the sea of the harbor awaiting the largest passenger ships and warships of the world. And as they entered the harbor, they saw exactly what Saul saw. High up on the hill, a heathen temple to Apollo, the god of fertility and other things. He kept his head down and his hands over his eyes. He spent the night with a Jewish family. The next day was a meeting in the synagogue that went down a small, narrow lane, not knowing that in a few more years, within his lifetime, a great war would break out between the Jewish inhabitants of Caesarea by the sea and the entire Roman Empire, right there on that narrow street. He walked past the great hippodrome, beautiful, garnished with all sorts of statues, a vast area of land and stadium seats laid out for horse racing. Neither could he have possibly conceived that on one day, 40,000 Jewish men and women and children would in the year 66 be slaughtered in the stadium floors of that hippodrome. Now, Saul did with his father and his grandfather the same thing that most people did. He timed his arrival to be on a Sabbath. And so for 60 miles, he and other Jewish people came arm in arm, singing the Psalms of Ascent as they approached the city, coming in on the Sabbath day, the day before and the day after, to observe the great Passover, to see the city, to see the gold, to see the pomp, to see the thousands of Levites, the hundreds of trumpets, to watch 20 men push and pull and tug to do nothing but open the gate to the city of Jerusalem, to walk into that great packed temple courtyard and watch the Levites blow their trumpets and their drums, their bugles, and see the high priest step out on the highest terrace and know that behind those doors was God himself. That was Saul's first time to be in the city. There is a little-known event that took place in his life that day. There were over 100 colonnades, or over 100 cloisters, where many things took place, including buying and selling, but there was one cloister that was given over to a very devout and highly regarded teacher. His name was Hillel.
Subscribe and click the bell to stay connected to more profound teachings that draw you deeper into union with Jesus.